Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, Nick Brana is going to be here on Saturday at 8 p.m. Nick Brana was the one who started Draft Sanders for People's Party, and that's morphed into Movement for People's Party. I spoke with Nick. Nick and I spoke for like 2 hours the other day, and the conversation ultimately boiled down to this idea of how to organize the left, like how to get to the point where you're getting these disparate groups, like Greens and unions and so forth, under this kind of collective banner where these guys are interacting with one another. My thing with this was, many times groups on the left don't like to shed their identity, in which case the groups can keep their identity, but those groups collaborate as if they're one thing. It's almost like a delegation or like a body of something. So you may have Greens, you may have people who are unions, you may have people who are called socialists, socialist anarchists, socialist select, whatever. All of these different specific groups that are, for the most part, believe a lot of similar things. Let's say, at the very least, from the standpoint of politics in this country, when we're talking about ranges on the left and right, these people are firmly on the left. And there may be differences among these people, but ultimately they are firmly on the left, particularly in comparison to the faux left Democratic Party and the left, or the rabid Taliban right Republican Party. So having these groups work together in coordination in some way, and working together almost as a delegation. I like the delegation idea. That's mostly my idea. I don't know if Nick goes with that one. But the delegation idea, I love that idea. So Nick will be on the show. We would discuss the People's Party, what he's been doing up to this point, his plans for the party itself, and for the most part, anything that Nick wants to discuss. I've had a conversation with Nick before. It was a quick one where I interviewed him. I think we were at the Left Forum. And I was extremely skeptical of the Draft Sanders thing because of what Sanders was doing. I think Nick and I may be on the same page on the Sanders thing, that if we talk about a third party, Sanders is somewhat problematic. And Sanders may be hurting himself just from the standpoint of helping Democrats to the degree that he's been helping Democrats. But I'm going to let Nick explain his own hypothesis for that. But Saturday, 8 p.m., Nick Brana will be on the show. So, one of the things that Nick and I talked about also was, I told Nick that I thought this was a great idea for the People's Party thing, and I wanted to be a part of it in any way that I could be a part of it. So, yes, I definitely want him on the show. And my feeling also was, if I could help in any capacity, I want to help. What I'm thinking is, the capacity I probably can help more than anything else is probably from a media standpoint. If anybody is associated with either Union, the Greens, not Draft Sanders, what's the thing called? Like Bernie Kratz, any of those groups. If any of those groups are interested in forming up to creating this kind of collective confederate, let me know. Either write at the bottom or send me an email. I mean, ultimately, the left needs to organize. And the vehicle for the left, I'm sorry, it's not the Democratic Party. Like, the best that you got, meaning the heyday of the left, was FDR. And the best that FDR would do was save capitalism. It is true that Wallace, coming behind FDR, was a lefty, more lefty than FDR was, and would have probably enshrined the things that FDR put into law. He would have made those things more stable, including going further into like a jobs guarantee and healthcare and this other stuff. But Truman took that seat, meaning you didn't go Wallace, you got Truman. The best that you got, meaning in the heyday of the Democratic Party, was somebody who was essentially working to save capitalism. Don't you want a little bit more than that? Meaning, if that's the best that you could get, do you honestly believe that any of the people who are in offices right now, who are running for Congress, who are running for president, who are going to be running for Senate, do you honestly believe that any of those Democrats are to the point where they're further than an FDR character? Now, I know you might say Sanders, but Sanders doesn't consider himself a Democrat. Sanders considers himself a socialist. But even then, Sanders is just a classic Democrat if you're looking at policy. Maybe a little further to the left. I mean, if you're talking about, like, I don't know what Sanders' position, like nationalizing banks or nationalizing railways or electric companies. But But definitely the only person you're talking about who's like that is Sanders. And Sanders is not a Democrat. At least not yet. He's not running as a Democrat yet. There's one catch with this. There's one side point that I want to make. And then this is a point that Brana made, and I actually agree with him on it. Lefties, and I think I'm guilty of this too, have been putting a lot on this idea of Sanders running in 2020. Going with this maybe naive assumption that Sanders has a good chance of winning in 2020. 2020 is 3 years off. Anything can happen in those 3 years. And if the left is purely organizing behind Sanders in this way, we're putting all of our eggs to that one specific basket. If anything happened to Sanders, what are you going to do? Then what? Then what? Ultimately, I understand that Sanders is doing the things that he believes is necessary to remain A, relevant, and B, to allow himself to try to break through what they have as a Democratic Party. Whether that's rigging the process by 60% less, fucking amazing, superdelegates, getting rid of closed primaries, well, whatever those things are, meaning trying to get reforms in the process with the idea that he's going to run in that updated, reformed process. The catch for that is, Tom Perez, if he wanted to, can make those changes by himself. The idea that they're waiting for months and months and months and months and months on end is somewhat problematic and somewhat of a tell. They may change that in the Rules Committee. It's possible. They may change that when they make the final vote in totality, meaning they may actually vote on those things. In which case, you can make a point of saying, okay, they've made some progress in regards to making the process less rigged. But the main problem with the politics is to do with the money in politics. Yes, they've rigged the process, so that's somewhat problematic. So don't get me wrong. I'm not, I have no illusions about that. But the capacity to throw 100,000 or 200,000 people off the rolls in Brooklyn is a problem. The capacity to cheat like they did in Vegas, in Nevada, where they just outright stole Nevada. Don't take my word for it. Look at the tape itself. All I'm saying is there are more problems that extend beyond just the Reform Commission or just the things that the Reform Commission are tackling, even though, yes, if they make those modest changes, then yes, those modest changes will be decent. We're putting our eggs in one basket. And I strongly suspect that may be problematic. So, that being said, I still think Sanders has a damn good chance of winning. I am curious to see whether or not they actually implement those changes. I'm fantastically curious about that. Like, will they get to the point where they say, okay, my fear of this is, or what I think is going to happen, what's potentially is going to happen, is that the reason why Tom Perez doesn't make those changes himself is because Tom Perez wants to get to the point where he doesn't have to make those changes. If it becomes clear that Democrats have a decent chance of winning, which they do, odds are they may likely win the Senate and they may win the House. What is the impetus to put through those reforms if they believe that the public itself is so freaked out that the public is willing to just run back into their arms? I would make the argument that the impetus goes to zero. That's the argument I would make. So the longer it takes them to put through those reforms, the more skeptical I think people should be. In fact, I think they should be skeptical in general. And again, the issue with politics in this is the money in politics. It's that these guys are shamelessly obsequious to cash in the same way the Republicans are obsequious to cash. And until you have a party that's willing to full board take on campaign finance, meaning publicly funded elections, and make that argument in a full-throated way without hedge or backing up from that particular point, then your issues are the same. You still have politicians that are bought, and that's problematic to say the least. So I look forward to having this conversation further with Brana. That being said, I gotta be honest, even though I love the idea of a movement for a People's Party, if Sanders runs, Sanders is getting my vote. It's unequivocal. There is no hedge on that. I have no backup on that. I mean, he has my support in a full-throated way. whether that's defending Sanders from people who want to go after him, or whether that's, you know, and to be fair, yeah, I did go after Sanders sometimes myself from calling guys sheepdog and all this other stuff. But ultimately, I acknowledge the benefits that he's afforded. I'd make the case that the reason why Brana has this movement for a People's Party is purely because of the space that Sanders gave him. You can make a case that Sanders gave all of us a certain amount of space, particularly if you're talking about people on the left. You can go after the guy. You can say that he wasn't up to snuff. He didn't do everything that you want him to do. He wasn't a perfect human being. He didn't, you know, he wasn't this glimmering angel shining in the sunlight. He was a person. He was a flawed human being, just like all of us are flawed human beings. And no, just like everybody else, they don't necessarily do everything perfect to the way that people believe that they should do those things. That being said, Brana has my support. Full-throated support. We need a third party. We need a viable third party, not just as a pressure candidate. We need that party to be able to win. And if the left organizes itself, be it Greens, be it Socialists, be it whatever, wayward Democrats, independents, if these people organize themselves around the People's Party, it's not necessarily easy to create a third party. And yeah, it is somewhat of an uphill climb in two ways. It's an uphill climb because of the way the parties have rigged the system that makes it difficult for third parties. And there's also this kind of esoteric aspect of this almost spiritual aspect of this, where I'd vote for this person if it wasn't for the other. Meaning you could have 60-70% of the population wanting and needing and expecting a third party, but refuse to vote for that third party when it's available because they believe that that vote is not going to count. I'd vote for them if I thought other people would vote for them. You might have 20 or 30% of the population that would vote for that third party that decided not to because they want to lump their vote in with the person who they think may win. It's time to stop being complicit. It's time to get to the point of being willing to say no if that person is not representing your interests. And being vocal and open about willing to say no. They need to understand that they can lose if they're not representing your interests. The best way to do that is a third party. So, if you want to push Democrats, if you want a third party to represent your interests in full, in both of those cases, a third party is your best option. I love what Nick is doing on this. So, if, like I said, if there are other parties out there, if there are other groups, like for instance, like Fight for 15, any religious groups, any group that finds itself as being this kind of affiliated thing, or this thing unto itself, meaning it's a group. If the leadership of that group is interested in kind of forming up and coming together and assisting with this, that leadership is immensely welcome. So I would say you can send me an email. My contact information is always at the bottom, or at the very least on the About page. And I will end it at that. Nick Brana will be here Saturday at 8 p.m. Thanks, guys.